The first howl sliced through the twilight, a raw, lonesome sound that snagged on something deep inside him. It wasn't just any coyote, no. This one carried a weight, a memory like dust in an old, unvisited room. Elias felt it, a cold whisper on his neck, raising the hairs, telling him, some things just won't stay buried. The sun dipped below the mesas, painting the sky in blood orange. And the coyote cried again, a mournful lament that echoed not just in the canyon, but in the dark corners of his own soul. The scent of brewing coffee usually chased away the morning chill, a familiar comfort in Elias's small, weathered cabin tucked away in a remote corner of the Pecos Badlands. It started innocently enough, just a distant yelp, barely noticeable above the rustling of the scrub brush. Then it grew. Each evening, as the sun kissed the horizon, a single coyote would appear on the ridge overlooking his cabin, a dark, angular silhouette against the fading light, and let out a chilling, drawn-out howl. It wasn't the usual territorial bark. This was a lament, a sound that pricked at the edges of his calm, a mournful wail that seemed to carry the weight of untold sorrow. He'd seen coyotes his whole life, creatures of habit and cunning, but never one that seemed to watch him. Not like this. This one felt different, deliberate. For years, his routine had been as steady as the sunrise. Coffee, a quick check on the fence lines, sharp enough to make his hand twitch for the rifle he kept by the door. A worn Winchester his father had passed down. His heart, usually a steady drum, had thumped a little harder, a rhythm of unease disrupting his usual composure. Elias, a man known for his unflappable demeanor, found himself checking the cabin locks twice, the heavy oak door feeling suddenly thin against the encroaching darkness. He peered out, his eyes scanning the darkening scrub, but saw nothing. Just a vast, empty expanse under a sky bruised with twilight, the air thick with the scent of creosote and the lingering echo of that mournful cry. He told himself it was just a coyote, a hungry one, perhaps drawn by the scent of his small herd. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. This felt different, personal, as if the desert itself was speaking to him, or something within it was trying to reach him. It was a disturbance to the very rhythm of his solitary existence, a disharmonious note in the quiet symphony of his life. He poured himself another cup of coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the creeping unease in his gut. The silence after the howl felt heavier, pregnant with unspoken questions. He knew he couldn't ignore it much longer. The feeling of being watched intensified with each passing dusk, a chilling premonition that the quiet life he had built was about to be irrevocably altered. He just didn't know what was coming or why. Tending to his small herd of longhorns, then repairs on whatever needed mending. He was a man of quiet habits, finding solace in the vast, unforgiving landscape. His only regular company was Old Man Hemlock, a prospector who occasionally stumbled by, more interested in swapping tall tailies than striking gold. Hemlock, with his sun-leathered face and eyes that held the wisdom of 1,000 desert dawns, often brought with him a fresh perspective, sometimes even a nugget of news from the sparse settlements beyond Elias's reach. But these past few sunsets, that comfort had been shattered. Yesterday, the howl had been closer, almost right outside his window. The howls didn't stop. They became a nightly ritual, a dark serenade that seeped into Elias's bones, twisting his sleep into restless nightmares of shadows and unseen eyes. Redemption, a collection of dusty shacks and a single rickety saloon hoping for news for a lead, for anything that could explain her disappearance. The general store was run by Mabel, a woman whose eyes missed nothing. Her face a roadmap of hard-won wisdom etched by years of sun and wind. She was sorting through a shipment of dry goods, the scent of canvas and tobacco filling the air when Elias entered, his boots kicking up dust on the worn wooden floor. He tried to ignore it, to busy himself with chores. "You look like you've seen a ghost, or worse." Working until his muscles ached, and his mind was too tired to wander. Willow's gone. That's a mighty fine horse, Elias. Nothing. Like she just faded into the air. No tracks, you say? Vanished in the night, clean as a whistle. But the sound was a phantom limb, always there, aching, a constant reminder of the growing disquiet. One evening, unable to bear the psychological weight any longer, he decided to confront it. Rifle in hand, its familiar weight a cold comfort, he slipped out of the cabin, moving like a shadow through the creosote bushes. She mused, her eyes distant, as if listening to an unseen melody. Mabel's words, cryptic as they were, resonated with the unsettling feeling that had been growing inside him. He knew she meant more than just lost livestock. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize, but the image of the black coyote, its eyes fixed on him in the twilight, flashed in his mind, sharp and vivid. He walked out of the store, the silence of redemption pressing in on him, heavier than the oppressive heat. He had lost Willow, a tangible, devastating loss, but he also felt a more insidious one, the loss of his peace of mind, of the familiar control he had over his solitary world. The howls had taken something from him, and he had no idea how to get it back, or what else they might demand. Different kind of sound, too. Not the hungry kind, more like sorrow or a calling. She paused, her eyes narrowing as they met his. Some folks say when a coyote cries like that, especially after dark, it's calling for something lost. Or something that should be lost, something that ain't at rest. Hoping to catch a glimpse of the creature, to put an end to its nightly torment. He tracked the sound, a chilling siren call, to a rocky outcrop near the dry creek bed. A place where the shadows deepened early. As he approached, he saw it. Not just one, but a pair of glowing eyes reflecting the last fading light of dusk. It was larger than any coyote he'd seen, its fur almost black against the muted landscape, a stark contrast to the pale dust. He raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger, but something held him back. The coyote didn't bolt. It simply stared, its head cocked, and then let out a mournful, almost human-like cry that echoed off the canyon walls, carrying a profound sense of sorrow that Elias couldn't quite place. It felt like a challenge, a deliberate taunt, a lament meant for him. The next morning, his prize mare, Willow, was gone. Her stall gate was unlatched, not broken, as if she'd simply walked out into the night, drawn by some unseen force. Elias searched for hours, riding his other horse, Comanche, across the familiar terrain, his eyes scanning every rock, every bush. He found no tracks, no sign of struggle, just an unsettling emptiness where his most trusted companion should have been. Panic, a feeling he rarely indulged, began to creep in, cold and insidious. Willow was more than just a horse. She was his lifeline in this isolated land, a loyal companion, an extension of himself. Losing her was like losing a limb, a part of his very being. Desperate, he rode into the nearest town. "Morning, Elias," she said, her voice raspy like dry leaves, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Worse, Mabel." Mabel stopped her work, her movements slow and deliberate, her gaze sharper than ever. He nodded, the frustration clear in his eyes, his jaw tight. Strange. Been hearing a lot of coyote howling lately. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine, despite the dry heat. The loss of Willow gnawed at Elias, a constant ache in his chest, a hollow space that echoed the nightly howls. He scoured the land, his usually steady hands now clenched into fists. He stumbled, falling hard onto the rocky ground, and the canyon walls seemed to dissolve, melting into a shimmering mirage. The present bled back in, pulling him from the haunting embrace of memory. The black coyote stood at the canyon's edge, its eyes fixed on him, luminous in the encroaching darkness. Its cry a low, guttural moan that was both accusation and lament, a mournful echo of the past. It wasn't just a coyote. It was a specter, a living manifestation of his buried past, a chilling reminder of his gravest sin. His emotions usually kept under lock and key, guarded by years of stoic silence, began to fracture. Grief, raw and potent, mixed with a desperate anger at himself, at the unforgiving land, at the very memory that refused to die, demanding to be acknowledged. He looked at the trap, its rusty teeth mirroring his own self-inflicted wounds, then at the coyote, its unwavering gaze burning into his soul. He could try to free himself, to escape the physical pain, but it would take time, and the sun was setting, plunging the canyon into a deeper, more menacing darkness. The shadows stretched like grasping claws, ready to consume him. He had a choice, stark and agonizing. Abandon the past once more, try to escape the trap in this place, and continue living with the unresolved grief. Or confront the very thing that had brought him here, the haunting echo of Lily's last moments, the unaddressed pain that had festered for decades. The memory of her eyes, full of both love and pain, of her trusting nature and his ultimate failure, made the decision even harder, tearing him between the impulse to flee and the terrifying need to finally face the truth. He wasn't in the present anymore. He was back there, 20 years ago, his face younger, less etched with time and sorrow, his heart brimming with a reckless optimism that now felt like a cruel joke. He saw Lily, her red hair bright against the pale desert sky, like a vibrant flame in the stark landscape. Her laughter echoing through the canyon as they explored. Two reckless souls in love, convinced they were invincible. He remembered the day they set those traps, full of youthful exuberance, full of a naive ignorance of the consequences of their actions. And then, the next morning, the wailing not of a coyote, but of a desperate, terrified animal. The frantic search. Lily's scream, sharp and piercing, tearing through the quiet morning. The horrifying sight of her small hand caught in the very same trap he was now in, blood blossoming on her skin like a grotesque flower. The fear in her eyes, raw and agonizing, mixed with a chilling disappointment that cut him deeper than any blade. He remembered her fading away, despite his desperate attempts to save her, despite his frantic prayers and futile remedies. The fever taking her in the dust and heat, her fragile life slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. His heart had shattered into a million pieces that day, scattering across the unforgiving desert floor. He had buried her beneath a twisted mesquite tree, its gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the indifferent sky. The agonizing silence of the desert, his only witness, his unbearable guilt, the only eulogy. He had blamed himself ever since. The guilt, a suffocating blanket he could never shake, a weight that had defined his solitary existence. His rifle clattering away, skittering across the stones, just out of reach. He looked down and saw a glint of metal, a rusty trap, half hidden by overgrown brush, its ancient teeth clamped firmly around his calf. It was an old trapper's snare, one he'd set himself years ago, when he was just a young man trying to make a living, before he truly understood the land, before he understood the delicate balance of life and consequence. His calm demeanor replaced by a simmering frustration that threatened to boil over. The howls continued each night, an unyielding torment that seemed to mock his desperate efforts, weaving themselves into the fabric of his thoughts. One evening, as the first stars pricked through the deepening blue, casting a ghostly luminescence over the vast landscape, the familiar cry began, closer than ever, a raw, emotional sound that ripped through the quiet. Elias, exhausted and on edge, slammed his fist on the rough-hewn table, a splinter digging into his skin, unnoticed. "Enough," he muttered, his voice a guttural growl, grabbing his rifle. He wasn't going to hunt it. He was going to find it, to force an answer from the creature, no matter the cost. He followed the sound, not to the usual ridge, but deeper into the arroyo, where the shadows stretched long and twisted, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. The air grew colder, the scent of sage replaced by something earthy and damp, a smell that brought with it a forgotten sense of dread. He found himself at the mouth of a narrow canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side. A place he hadn't visited in years. A place he'd sworn he'd never return to. A place buried deep within his memory, sealed off by layers of time and denial. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing pain shot through his leg, jerking him violently forward. A wave of dizziness washed over him, a sickening lurch that made his head spin. Now, as the pain in his leg sharpened, a burning agony that mirrored the pain in his heart. The pain in his leg was a dull, persistent throb, a physical agony that grounded him, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Elias continued, his voice laced with a mixture of fear and defiance, the words torn from his chest. A sound that sliced through the stillness of the canyon. God, I tried. But the fever, it took her. It took her from me, just like this goddamn desert takes everything. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at his eyes, the first he had shed in decades, a release of bottled-up anguish. An almost perfect replica of the very moment Lily had cried out in pain when the trap had sprung, its dark eyes seeming to peer directly into his soul, laying bare every regret, every unspoken sorrow, every shard of his broken heart. A wave of despair, profound and suffocating, washed over Elias. He was trapped, not just physically by the rusty jaws, but by his own past, by a grief that had festered for decades, an unhealed wound that had defined his existence. He felt utterly, completely lost, adrift in a sea of remorse. The canyon walls seemed to close in, pressing down on him, the shadows swallowing him whole, threatening to extinguish the last flicker of his spirit. This was it, he thought. This was the end. He was going to die here, just as Lily had in the cold, unforgiving embrace of the desert, haunted by his own mistakes, his final moments consumed by the weight of his unredeemed past. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for whatever was to come, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, beating a final, desperate rhythm. Elias flinched, the sound ripping through him like a physical blow. It was a familiar sound, one that stirred a flicker of hope, however small, in the depths of his despair. The coyote's head snapped up, its ears swiveling, its intelligent eyes suddenly distant, as if listening to something beyond human comprehension. It let out one last mournful howl, a sound filled with a strange mix of regret and resignation, a final farewell. And then, in a flash, it was gone, melting into the deepening gloom, leaving only the echo of its cry. Elias opened his eyes, disoriented, the sudden absence of the creature as jarring as its presence. The sound of the bell, now closer, was fading into the vast silence of the desert night. He was still caught in the trap, still bleeding, still in pain, but the immediate, terrifying threat was gone, replaced by a baffling emptiness and a sliver of bewildered hope. Resurrecting the horror of that day, he scrambled, digging his fingers into the dirt, trying to free his leg from the trap, but the rusty jaws held firm, unyielding. He could hear his own ragged breathing, loud in the deepening silence, a frantic counterpoint to the thumping of his own terrified. The coyote circled him slowly, its movements fluid and deliberate, like a predator cornering its prey, its gaze never leaving his. An unrelenting mirror to his own despair. Are you her ghost, come back to haunt me? To punish me for what I couldn't stop? Through his bones, a primal hum that resonated with his fear. It took a slow, deliberate step closer, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that chilled Elias to the bone, an unnerving sentience that transcended mere animal instinct. This wasn't just an animal. It was a messenger, a conduit from the past he had so desperately tried to outrun, a living echo of his deepest regret. But it was the searing ache in his heart that truly crippled him, a wound that no bandage could staunch. Elias looked at the trap, its metal jaws mirroring the vice grip of his past, then at the coyote, its dark form a stark silhouette against the last sliver of dying light. The memory of Lily, vibrant and alive, then broken and fading, was a raw wound, bleeding fresh. "What do you want?" Elias rasped, his voice hoarse, a desperate plea addressing the creature as if it could understand the depths of his torment. "What more can you take?" The coyote responded with a low growl. "Is this about her?" The coyote let out a sharp bark. "I tried to save her," Elias pleaded, his voice cracking, a desperate whisper swallowed by the vastness of the canyon. The coyote stopped, directly in front of him, its gaze unwavering. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound broke through the coyote's guttural growl. The clear, sweet jingle of a bell, distant but unmistakably present. The jingle of the bell faded, leaving Elias alone in the growing chill of the canyon, each one a tiny pinprick of light against the vast, uncaring darkness. The world seemed to mock his solitude. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried desert flowers, wild primrose and verbena, of visits from loved ones who had passed, a tangible connection to a past he could now finally embrace without fear or shame. A new path lay before him, one not of forgetting, but of acceptance, of carrying the lessons learned, the love lost, as part of his journey, not an anchor. He had found a way to bridge the chasm between sorrow and hope. The solitude was still there, an integral part of his nature, but now it felt less like a prison and more like a vast open space, waiting to be filled with something new, something profound. He looked out at the rising sun, its golden light washing over the rugged landscape, the desert stretching before him, vast and indifferent, yet suddenly alive with possibility. And for the first time in years, he felt a strange mix of courage and an unfamiliar, quiet doubt. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or what challenges still lay ahead, but he knew he was ready to face it, not as a broken man, but as one who had been profoundly transformed, now held a new, profound meaning for him. It wasn't just a toy. It was a token of forgiveness, a release from the chains of guilt that had bound him for so long. The jingle of the bell that had scared the coyote away. He realized now. It was the small, almost imperceptible sound of Willow's bridle as she made her way back, drawn by an unseen force, or perhaps guided. She hadn't been stolen. She had been guided, sent by something or someone to lead him back to the very place where his grief began, so he could finally find his way out. The black coyote hadn't been a tormentor, but a guide, a spiritual messenger, forcing him to face the past he had so desperately tried to bury, so that he could finally be free. Flowers Lily had adored was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a cardinal. It was a perfect replica of a toy Lily had loved as a child, a cherished gift her father, a skilled woodcarver, had made for her. Elias had seen it only once, tucked away in her small cedar box of treasures. A private, intimate glimpse into her childhood. His heart seized, a profound understanding dawning on him. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a message, a final, poignant whisper from a ghost he had finally confronted, a tangible sign of something beyond his understanding. His small, isolated existence feeling more fragile than ever. Even among men, Elias had always been a lone wolf, preferring the stark honesty of the silent desert to the unpredictable complexities and superficialities of human interaction. But now, that solitude felt like a cage, a punishment for a past he couldn't escape, a self-imposed exile from the very comfort he now craved. He cleaned and bandaged his wound with practiced hands, the sterile scent of disinfectant doing little to mask the lingering smell of dust and regret that clung to him. He sat by the dying embers of his fire, staring into the flickering light, his mind a whirlwind of memories and unanswered questions, lost in thought. His leg throbbing with a dull, persistent ache that anchored him to the harsh reality of his situation. The sudden, inexplicable departure of the coyote left him disoriented, the confrontation ending not with a bang but with an unsettling, lingering silence that hung heavy in the air. He managed to pry open the trap, the rusty jaws protesting with a sickening grind as they released his calf. He stumbled, favoring his injured limb, the pain a sharp, undeniable reminder of the past that had just clawed its way back to the surface, raw and exposed. He was physically bruised, the skin around the trap marks already swelling and purpling, but it was the emotional wound that bled most profusely, a gaping chasm in his soul. Lily's face, her vibrant laughter, her desperate cries, they were all painfully real now, vivid and immediate. No longer distant echoes, but palpable presences that tormented him. He limped back to his cabin under a sky filled with indifferent, glittering stars. The next morning, as the first tentative rays of sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and gold, a familiar sight appeared on the ridge. His mare, Willow, grazing peacefully. She looked unharmed, untroubled, her coat gleaming in the nascent light, as if she had merely wandered off for an evening stroll, a brief detour in her familiar routine. Elias stared, disbelief warring with a flicker of hope that pierced through the gloom that had enveloped him. He stumbled out to her, his injured leg protesting with every step, and she whinnied softly, a gentle, welcoming sound, nuzzling his hand with her velvety nose. But as he ran his hand along her neck, checking for any hidden injuries, he noticed something tucked into her mane. Just behind her ear, a small, intricately worked leather pouch, tied with a faded red ribbon. It was the same distinct shade of crimson that Lily had always favored, the very ribbon she had worn in her fiery red hair on the day they met. A lifetime ago, a symbol of their vibrant, fleeting love. He untied the pouch, his fingers trembling with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, burgeoning hope. The cardinal, a symbol of hope and renewal, Elias clutched the wooden bird, the weight of it both heavy and liberating. The wooden cardinal became Elias's constant companion, a small, tangible piece of his past that no longer felt like a burden, but a blessed relic. He carried it always in his pocket, its smooth, worn surface a quiet comfort against his thumb, a natural inclination forged by years in the vast wilderness, plunging the world into a canvas of inky blues and starlight. A lone coyote howled, its voice carrying across the quiet vastness of the desert, a long, drawn-out cry that held no malice, only the wild call of the land. Elias didn't flinch. He simply listened, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, a quiet warmth spreading through his chest. He thought of Lily, not with a searing pain, not with the agonizing guilt that had plagued him for decades, but with a tender ache, a quiet, enduring love that had transcended time and loss, a fragile beauty preserved in his heart. He had confronted his ghost, faced the terrifying truth of his guilt, and in that confrontation, he had found a path to forgiveness, not from others, but from himself, the most difficult absolution of all. Nothing was truly back to what it was. The scars remained, etched deep into his soul, a permanent record of his journey. But Elias was profoundly different. He was no longer just a cowboy hiding from his past. He was a man who had wrestled with his demons, faced his deepest regrets, and in the process, had finally begun to live again, truly and fully, embracing the bittersweet tapestry of his life. The desert had witnessed his sorrow, heard his desperate pleas, and now it witnessed his quiet, hard-won peace, a peace that resonated with the very soul of the land. But it no longer felt like loneliness, not until he stops and faces it. It was a space for reflection, for quiet acceptance, for the slow, gentle healing of old wounds. He would often sit on his porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ever-shifting hues of fiery orange, soft rose, and deep violet, watching the vast expanse of the Pecos Badlands unfold before him. He saw the beauty now, the stark, raw grandeur of the landscape, not just its harshness, its unforgiving nature. The land that had once seemed to hold his grief captive, mirroring his own desolation, now felt like a cradle, gently rocking him toward a fragile, hard-won peace. It was a place of both memory and renewal, a reminder of the profound journey he had endured. The howls of the coyotes still echoed through the canyon at sunset, a familiar chorus against the vast silence of the desert. But now they were just sounds, part of the land's primal symphony. No longer a haunting lament, no longer a harbinger of dread. The black coyote never reappeared, its purpose seemingly fulfilled, its message delivered, its task complete. Elias stayed on his ranch, the familiar rhythm of the land grounding him, providing a steady anchor in his transformed world. But his routine, once rigid and isolating, shifted, softened by a newfound openness. He still tended his herd and mended fences, his hands calloused and strong. But now there was a subtle, almost imperceptible lightness in his step, a quiet sense of peace in his movements. He found himself riding into redemption more often, not just for supplies, but to simply sit on Mabel's porch, sharing a quiet cup of coffee, the steam rising into the cool morning air. He even told her, in halting, uncharacteristically open words, about the black coyote, about Lily, and the mysterious wooden bird. Mabel listened, her wise eyes seeing beyond his words, understanding the arduous, soul-searing journey he had taken. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his profound transformation, a silence more comforting than any words. The solitude was still a profound part of him, an ingrained habit. One evening, as the last sliver of sun vanished, a man can outrun the devil, but he ain't never gonna outrun his own shadow.